Okay, this next bloke is a fascinating individual. He started life as an ecologist, PhD in ecology, got involved in environmental movements, was around at the start of Greenpeace, virtually a foundation member of Greenpeace, and spent his early years campaigning with Greenpeace. Now he's very dark on the environmental movement. He's changed his stripes, if you like. Have a look at what he had to say. Dr. Patrick Moore, I caught up with him earlier. Patrick Moore, thanks for joining Viewpoint.
Very nice to be with you.
I want to start on climate change and carbon emission policy. Does it surprise you that global warming and carbon emissions policy has been the predominant political issue in Australia over the past decade?
Yes, especially seeing as though Australia amounts to a drop in the bucket in global emissions. It doesn't seem to me that it should be the #1 issue on your agenda. And besides which, carbon dioxide is the most important food for all the plants on Earth, which we need to eat in order to survive, and therefore carbon dioxide is the most important food for us. So why is everybody so worried about it when the world is not warming for the last 18 years? Actually, it wouldn't be a bad thing if it did warm up a little bit in my country of Canada, the Great White North, where the reason there's hardly anybody living in it is because it's too cold.
I'll come back to the pause in a moment, but you do concede that human-induced carbon emissions did contribute or have contributed to global warming in the second half of the 20th century?
No, I do not. This present warming trend began 250 years ago with the end of the Little Ice Age. The Thames River last froze over in England in 1814. We certainly had nothing to do with that. It had been freezing over on a regular basis for 300 years during the Little Ice Age, and now the climate has warmed, and they say that we're responsible for the last 50 years or so. I don't buy it, and I do not see that carbon dioxide is actually the main cause of warming in this world.
Do you believe that carbon dioxide, human-induced carbon dioxide, does have some impact on the climate?
Yes, theoretically or hypothetically, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which all else being equal could cause warming. But all else is not equal. The Earth is not a laboratory where everything else is controlled. We have the whole atmosphere and all the oceans and all the clouds and all the trees and plants and plankton growing on the Earth all interacting together. It may well be that increases in carbon dioxide actually have the opposite effect to warming the Earth due to creating more water vapor in the atmosphere and more clouds. You cannot predict the future of the climate with a computer model. It is not a crystal ball, and there's no way that it's possible to see through chaos in climate with a computer model like they say they can.
Well, science is about testing theories against observable fact, I suppose, but you are a scientist, you have a PhD in ecology, but do you accept that you're in the minority, that most of the scientific community thinks that carbon emissions, that CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere are having a deleterious effect?
The main word there was think. In other words, that's their opinion. But the 97% is a complete fabrication. And even if it was true, I would be proud to be in the 3% of people who recognize that carbon dioxide is in fact a positive factor in our climate. If there was no carbon dioxide in the global atmosphere, this would be a dead planet because it is the main food for all life on Earth. So I don't see how, given that we've had 18 years of no significant warming, during which time we've put 1/4 of all the CO2 into the atmosphere that humans have emitted since the beginning of the industrial age, there's no warming. So surely that brings into serious question the idea of a lockstep cause-effect relationship between CO2 emissions and climate change.
Well, whether or not people agree with you on the science or on what you think the long-term impacts are, the facts on the pause are indisputable, aren't they? The UK Met Office, Hadley Centre, a world-renowned centre on climate policy, says there has been a pause over the last 15 to 18 years in global warming. NASA calls it a hiatus, says there's some warming but not really at the same levels that we saw in the second half of last century. Why don't we hear more about this pause in global warming at the moment?
Because so many people are tied in, have a very strong interest in this waterfall of money, about $1 billion a day, that is going into all the various elites around believing in human-caused global warming. The scientists, the media, the Greenpeace and the environmental movement, the politicians, the businesses who are making a killing from all these subsidies on wind and solar energy. So it's very difficult to break through. But I tell you for sure, we do not have proof that we are the cause of warming. It isn't warming much anyways, so even if CO2 is a greenhouse gas, it's not having anywhere near the effect that people thought it would. But it is an incontrovertible fact that carbon dioxide is the most important food for life on Earth. And if it was 2, 3, and 4 times higher than it is today, we'd have higher crop production, higher forest production. It's a fact. There's no doubt about it. Google greening of the Earth and see what CSIRO has shown, 20 to 30% increase in photosynthesis and plant growth around the world due to carbon dioxide fertilization. It is a food. It is a nutrient. It is a fertilizer. It is not a pollutant. And I challenge anybody to tell me different.
Well, Australia, as you know, had the world's most expensive carbon price until this year. Now the Abbott government has switched to a direct action plan. They're going to spend over $2 billion abating carbon. Is that a waste of money, or is it at least useful to try and do something?
I don't know enough details about the farmer plan. What I do know is that no-till agriculture builds up carbon and nutrients in the soil and reduces the need for fertilizer and is a very important advent in modern farming. My friend Bill Crabtree out in Western Australia is leading in this effort, and I support him strongly. There's nothing wrong with increasing carbon in the soil. All I'm saying is there's also nothing wrong with increasing carbon dioxide in the global atmosphere.
Okay, you started off as one of the early or founding members of Greenpeace. You devoted your life then to protesting and against and trying to stop nuclear tests in the Pacific and elsewhere. You also tried to prevent whaling operations around the world. What has seen you, in a nutshell, what has seen you fall out with the environmental movement?
When we started, we had a strong humanitarian orientation to save humanity from nuclear war. By the time I left Greenpeace 15 years later, the movement was characterizing humans as the enemies of the earth. I wanted to move to find solutions. I'd been against a lot of things for a lot of years, and we had to do that in the early years. But once everybody in the world realized the environment was important, it's necessary to sit down with people in government and business and the academic community and try to find solutions that satisfy environmental, economic, and social priorities. That's sustainability. And the green movement is only focused on the green. They don't seem to care about what 7 billion people need every day to stay alive: food, energy, and materials. And we must find the balance, not a one-sided situation like they are proposing.
Well, I'm nowhere near as certain about these things as you are, but when we had our first emissions trading scheme floated in Australia, it was called a carbon pollution reduction scheme. And someone suggested that we should have someone needs to invent a carbon pollution reduction machine. I guess you would agree with my assessment that we do have a carbon pollution reduction machine. It's called a tree.
Well, actually, it's not carbon pollution. That's the whole point. The biggest travesty of all of this is that we're teaching our children that carbon is a poison when it's the most important food for plants. We are a carbon-based species. All life on Earth is carbon-based. Most people used to know that. Now they're teaching kids that carbon dioxide, more specifically, is pollution. This is ridiculous. It's not toxic. It's not poisonous. You can go up to 5,000 to 10,000 parts per million. In spaceships and submarines, that's where they keep it at. It's not toxic to the crew of those vessels. Everybody knows that who's on the inside of this subject. Carbon dioxide is a food, not a pollutant, not toxic, yet good for life. Those are opposites, and we should not be teaching children that carbon is pollution, when in fact it is a nutrition that everybody needs, and life on Earth itself would be impossible without it.
Patrick Moore, just finally, have you had much of a hearing in Australia? Have you spoken, for instance, on our national broadcaster, the ABC?
I have had a tremendous hearing here. I've been on Richo and Jones. I've been on Andrew Bolt's program. The ABC has yet to have me on. I'm not too worried about that, but it would be, you'd think, seeing as though I'm here in the country and I know what I'm talking about on this subject, and many people are very interested in my point of view, that ABC would at least have me on in order to slag me and harangue me and, you know, say nasty things about me or something, but they don't even do that. I mean, what's going on here?
I think they only have about 5 television stations and 65 radio stations, so it's probably hard to squeeze you in. Thanks very much for finding time for us tonight, Patrick Moore.
Thank you very much.
Now, I don't normally promote the ABC, but it would be good to see Dr. Patrick Moore on Q&A next week, wouldn't it?